is a fifth generation Oklahoman and his family has been here for over 120 years. He's a graduate of Oklahoma State University from the Agricultural Economics Department, 1982. And he was first elected to the House of Representatives in 1994. He represents Oklahoma's 3rd Congressional District, which takes up almost half of the state's landmass. And among other congressional roles, he serves as a member of the Republican whip team. So please help me welcome Congressman Lucas.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for the invitation to be here and with the patience. And yes, Rob, having a backup speaker because things go ever so smoothly in the nation's capital these days. We literally finished up, in the House, we finished up the process of funding the federal government for the rest of this fiscal year. Now, the fiscal year started on October 1 of last year, so we've been operating on temporary processes since then. And a number of my friends in the room understand how important it is to have consistent static funding, not these roller coasters. But about 11:30 last night, we finished passing the $1.5 trillion bill to fund the remainder of this federal bookkeeping year. We addressed sanctions dealing with the Russians and what's going on in Ukraine, the energy issues. We can talk more about that in a moment if you'd care to. And we adjourned for the week. I went back to the office, shut that down, walked the half a mile to the glorious 440 square foot efficiency I live in that glamorous lifestyle back east. Got to bed about 12:30, left the notice for the Uber to come at 4 o'clock in the morning, made it to the airport, got on the 6:15 plane, got to Oklahoma City, got here to come see you. I won't deny for a moment that I was a little disappointed that the schedule didn't allow me to take that wonderful flight to Stillwater to avoid going through the other metropolitan areas, but that's sometimes the way it works out. So I'm here. If I look a little shaggy around the ears, understand it's been kind of a long 24 hours and a short night. That said, let's talk for a moment about the lay of the political land, because the legislative process is a political process back east. Then let's discuss the last 2 years for a moment, what I want to almost call the lost 2 years, the COVID experience that we're working our way through and coming out of. Let's talk about the fella in Moscow who is trying to turn the world upside down and doing horrible damage in the process. And then let's visit a bit about the new 3rd Congressional District, thanks to redistricting, and some of the excitement going on in other parts of the elected process. I know we're a very civic-oriented group, so as a House member, I could talk about the wild and crazy U.S. Senate race without discussing my politics, so then it becomes theoretical more and such. That said, and then whatever you'd care to talk about. The lay of the land. The United States Senate is evenly divided between the two parties, so the majority leader is picked every morning when the vice president comes under her role as president of the United States Senate to break the tie to make Mr. Schumer of New York the majority leader. That's pretty evenly divided. And there are occasions in the Senate when they don't function because the majority is not the majority on that day because of a funeral or COVID or other things. United States House, 435 of us. There are 5 more Democrats than there are Republicans. Again, I know that seems like a large majority, but out of 535 members, there are times when Speaker Pelosi and the present majority can't function because of something going on in the home state or a COVID outbreak in a particular area. It just becomes more difficult to work. But the positive side of such an evenly balanced body is it makes it extremely difficult to do anything. And sometimes making it really hard to do anything is in the best interest of the Constitution and the Republic. Because if we do agree, we actually have to agree. So that's a good thing. The lost 2 years, as I call it. You know, in addition to being the legacy guy on the Ag Committee and past chairman and the author of the 2014 Farm Bill and the most senior Republican on the Financial Services Committee, I'm also the ranking member, senior Republican on the Science, Space, and Technology Committee. And if control of the House flips next year, and from my perspective, you know, it's a possibility, then I would be chairman of the committee. The last 2 years have been really kind of intense for those of us on the science committee, because not just trying to address the competition of our international competitors in the scientific community. Think of the other side of the Pacific, where they're spending massive amounts of money to try and duplicate and attempt to surpass the historic research engines that we have in this country, both public and private, universities and private enterprise too. But also, it's the committee with jurisdiction over the National Science Foundation, those research dollars, space program, NASA, the weather, the NOAA, all of those things. So we've had a really intense couple of years from the perspective of the committee. First, from the point of view of trying to address things like COVID. It is amazing how fast, and again, I'm not a proponent of mandatory vaccines, so don't even think that for a moment, but I am a proponent of using our best science to create alternatives and ways to address the challenges we face. And in the COVID situation, when President Trump announced Project Warp Speed, bringing every discipline from a variety of both public and private institutions together in corporate America to come up with, as quickly as possible, potential vaccines to address that, I think you should be very proud of that. Very proud of that, because in a matter of months, we did what would have taken decades or been impossible not that many years ago. We did what was not been possible. An amazing accomplishment. But it's only because we had made all those investments in the scientific capacity, both people and physical plants and in equipment, to be able to do that, the supercomputers, all of those things. Another area that falls within the science committee, which I'm very focused on, which is not always something that comes up in my town meetings back home, and that's the question about going back. It's not a question in my mind, it's just a timeline, going back to the moon and onto Mars. That same country where their leadership is working so hard to try and best us in the basic research enterprises is also very focused on putting people on the moon and going on to Mars. I have folks who will say to me in my town meetings, that's impossible. How can they do that? They're not that capable, blah, blah, blah. Think for a moment about a year and a half ago when they put their lander, their version of a lunar rover, on the backside of the moon. Now, in itself, it was an accomplishment to be able to do that technology, to create that equipment. We have, to this point, been really the only people who successfully done that at any extent, both on Mars and the moon. But they built the rover capable. It's now rolling around on the far side of the moon, where we've not been doing whatever. But the thing that's more amazing even than that to me is they had to develop and put into orbit a series of communication satellites around the moon, because remember, the backside, you never see it from the Earth. So they had to create a communications technology. They had to put it into orbit to connect to the rovers. And then, even something the Russians could never do in their heyday, they had to acquire land-based stations around the planet so they could communicate with the satellites communicating with the rover, putting all those pieces together. The Russians could never do that in the old Soviet days. There were times when they had no communications with their stuff off planet. Point being, they said a year ago they planned to have a full-time manned station on the moon. That's the first step to going to Mars and the off-world. I would suggest to you that that's an example of where we have to make sure that a totalitarian society, government, senior leadership does not control the future of the off-world. And think about all of the amazing science that we pushed forward with the Apollo program. Think about the world before. Okay, I'm born in 1960, but the world before Apollo, the vacuum tubes, no satellites, no communication satellites, no weather satellites, all of the things, the computers that were primitive compared to this present day, All of those things evolved out of that scientific enterprise. Going back to the moon and on to Mars is an important part of that. That said, National Weather Service. How do we make sure that one of the most amazing institutions, yes, government institutions, but it cooperates with private industry and provides information to private enterprises and all of us so that we can plan our lives and live our world and make our farming and energy decisions? How do we make sure that we utilize both public and private data in order to enhance and improve and advance the nature of our weather forecasting? That's an issue that falls into the hands of the Science Committee also. I'm working on that. Quite a complicated time. Agriculture. Next year, 2023, will be the 5th year of this Farm Bill. It will be time to reauthorize the basic agricultural code. I spent a lot of time with several of you in this room on these issues as an undergraduate student. I am a farmer by trade. I care about ag policy and rural America. I care about conservation, research, all of the things that make this wonderful system we have work. The 2014 Farm Bill that I had the privilege of being the chairman of the committee when we wrote what I would define, Doc may disagree with me, but I would define as a 3rd generation ag policy, 1933 to 1996, supply management. Some would say supply control. 1996 to 2014, the old Freedom to Farm program, remember the direct payments. Tell farmers and ranchers what's going to be available to them to use and allow them to use it as they saw fit. Good economic policy, impossible political policy to defend. 3rd generation is based on crop insurance, If you want to participate in the program, fine. If you don't, you don't have to. But you have to buy coverage to protect you on price and from weather. But you have to make decisions. I have folks I serve with in Congress tell me we farmers just want to farm for the crop insurance check, or you want to farm for this, that, or the other. And my response has always been, well, my wife has lots of life insurance on me. I make the premiums every month. I don't make those premiums so I can guarantee her a pool boy someday. I make those premiums so that nothing bad will happen to my family and to my farm. I don't plan on using the stuff, just as farmers want a crop, just as we want a crop. But we'll work our way through that. And it's always a struggle. It's always a struggle. Our friends in Europe, the element that has added to all of the other stress going on in the world, Mr. Putin. I'm not on the Intelligence Committee. I'm not on Armed Services. I'm not one of the I Spy folks on Homeland Security. I will acknowledge that. Financial Services, the Ag Legacy guy, science. But you have an individual here who carries a grudge, and it is affecting the way he looks at the world and how he handles his government. What do I mean by that? He was an old KGB agent. He was trained in the secret police. He was stationed in Dresden when the Soviet Union collapsed, when they had to pack up and leave a wonderful place to be stationed, I suspect, East Germany, which is now Germany. He holds a grudge that his way of life and the old Soviet empire were betrayed by someone. Think about 1918, 1933. There was somebody who had the same grudge about a war, the First World War. And I believe he means to reconstruct the Soviet empire, only to be the Russian Federation. And it has led him to engage in activities in Crimea and Georgia, in other countries that had been part of the Soviet Union, that are part of the adjoining regional area, where he used military force to basically subdue them. This time he made a mistake and jumped on a country that was large enough and had enough spirit and enough intensity and willingness to defend themselves, the Ukrainians, that they have chosen to fight back aggressively. And they have held off literally 1/5 of a million Russian troops now for days and days and days. And the Russians military doesn't operate in the way that the United States Army or a European army operates. They operate in a very vicious fashion. Very vicious fashion. We are helping, and the NATO allies are helping the Ukrainians to an amazing degree. Again, I'm not on the committees that have the reports on the missile counts and all that sort of stuff, but I will tell you there's major efforts to help the Ukrainians defend themselves. I would also suggest we have to be careful that we don't slide into a third world war. The Ukrainians are not a part of NATO. We have obligations to defend Estonia and Latvia and Poland and Romania. They are full NATO members, as are we, the Europeans and the Canadians. In the 1990s, we had a big discussion on the back rows in Congress about how far NATO should be expanded. And while no one now that I serve with wants to remember that, and most of them are gone, we discussed how close you could get to the Russian frontier without triggering a response. And that's why the Ukraine is not a part of NATO, even though we all want to help them in every way. But it's a complicated, challenging experience. And the fellow who runs the country is an old secret policeman from the KGB days. That's a different mindset than the rest of us have. That said, let's talk a little bit more on this optimistic, enthusiastic, positive vein I'm on. Inflation and the economy. Before the Ukrainian issues drove the oil and gas markets crazy, before the Ukrainian issues drove the price of wheat and corn crazy, because remember, the Ukrainians are big producers of feed grains. They are big producers of feed grains. Before all of that, we started down this trail on inflation. I'm an old fiscal conservative. I was a young farmer / rancher, a student not very far away from here in the late 70s and early 80s. And I told various press people that I can remember as a junior borrowing cow feed, money to buy cow feed from my local banker and paying 17% in 1981. And I was so happy to get it. I was so happy to get it. I wasn't a risk. It's just when inflation was running at 18% that one year, the banker was still losing money loaning it to me at 17. Matter of fact, the best scorching lecture I ever got from my beloved grandmother Lucas. Now, sometimes you're a college kid, and sometimes before you learn when and where to repeat the results of your lectures, you pop off occasionally. And my grandmother, being a Depression era lady, wanted to maintain maximum flexibility and safety for her life savings. So she was in the money market certificate thing back in that period. And she was so proud of her 13.5% money market certificate. I said, grandmother, you're only losing 3.5%, 4.5% every year. She tore me apart, explaining to me that that was an awesome rate of return on her money. But in the inflation of that period, she was losing money every day. So as we work our way into this or fall into this inflation stuff, I'm very sensitive from my upbringing. Yes, there's pressure because of what's going on in Europe. But the underlying issue is, as we slid into COVID, you remember, we voted massive amounts of money to keep the economy going. The Paycheck Protection Program, the supplemental funds through the Farm Bill programs to hold the economy together. I was one of those people who were raised by folks who were young men and women in the Great Depression. My parents started public school in 1937, a tough time for do anything in Roger Mills County, Oklahoma. So I was very sensitive about not sliding back into that kind of an abyss. And we spent a lot of money to hold the economy together. And we started to come out. At the beginning of this administration, they chose to do another big COVID bill. About 9% of it related to vaccines and healthcare issues, about 91% related to spending. And they overtorqued the economy. Let's be honest. No matter what any of the late night TV prognosticators on the left or the right say, inflation is still the concept of having too much money, changing too few the goods and services, and heating up the competition and raising prices. Add on to what I'm concerned about now, that you create, as we had in the 70s and early 80s, inflation expectations. You automatically assume prices are going to go up the next month, and you have to move ahead of the price rise. So you're creating the wave. I'm concerned about that. If I am chairman of the science committee next year, that means I'll be a part of a body that'll be pretty frugal. So be prepared for some adjustments. The Federal Reserve System cannot continue to hold interest rates at almost zero forever, right? My banker friends in the room. I took money in banking in 81 up the hill here. Inflation plus, I think the professor said 4.5% was the real interest rate for 500 years. That's not where we are now. But those challenges face us. That said, before we throw the floor to the opener, you throw me out the door, whichever comes first. We've made great progress on the health issues. I think we're coming out of the COVID experience. I believe we'll get a grip on our fiscal policy next year and we'll get back to rational. I hope that the Ukrainian situation Ukrainians will be sufficiently able to defend themselves as to cause pressure in Moscow to become so great on Mr. Putin that he will have to make an adjustment in his course, or the people around him will adjust his course for him. So I'm optimistic, but I do need about 4 inches of rain in Roger Mills County, because it all still comes back to what's the weather going to do? What are cow prices going to be? There are a couple of unnamed professors that I always consult with in every even-numbered year to know what my fate is. What's the price of wheat going to be in October? What are fat steers going to be worth on November 1? It's still the real world we're in. With that, Sarah, can we talk about whatever my friends want to talk about? I've never known any group larger than zero that was timid in this town. So. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was just curious, when a fellow member of Congress or someone you know in Washington who's not from Oklahoma, when they ask you, what are the people like in your district? What do you say? I'm curious how you describe us or your district to people in Washington. What do you think of us?
Well, first off, there is a perception among some of my colleagues from East and West Coast in certain places on the big ponds in the Midwest that we're all Neanderthal knuckle draggers here. I remind people, though, that my constituents, my region, the country for that matter, are salt of the earth, number one. I trust my constituents at their word. I have the most wonderful interaction with my constituents. I remind them that I am fortunate to be from a state that is incredibly diverse. Think about the 39 Indian tribes. Think about the freedmen. I think about all of the good folks who came to Oklahoma after the Vietnam War, the Laotians and the Vietnamese, the folks from Korea after the Korean War, that we are an amazing example of how society should work. Are we perfect? No. But we've got an awesome track record. Humor me for one moment. When I had been in Congress not very long, it came time to reauthorize the Voting Rights Act. It was 1995 or 96, but going back to the 1958 Act, fair elections, no discrimination, all this and the other. Up until a Supreme Court ruling, basically, all Southern states, technically, I've always thought of us as the Southwest, but we're a Southern state in the eyes of most of the country. All Southern states, with the exception of Oklahoma, had to have the Justice Department approve every change in state or local election laws. They had to approve every change in our precincts, our congressional districts, our legislative lines. It all had to be approved. And I would get questions from my colleagues, why aren't you people a part of this? Did you make a deal with Lyndon Johnson or something when he was Senate leader? Why are you people not in this? And I would say, well, we had a governor by the name of Raymond Gary in the 50s. And Raymond believed that you should not discriminate against anyone. And when George Wallace and Lester Maddox were taking the rest of the South the wrong direction, we desegregated our public universities, the National Guard, state government in the 50s. Governor Gary got the state legislature to change the ad valorem tax system to fund public schools because we needed to improve it. What he was really doing was wiping out the Jim Crow schools. We have a history of being an amazing place, and we don't get credit for it around the country. Raymond Gary deserves credit too. He was a Democrat. He's the fellow, if you remember, who said when he was harassed over why he was doing all this in the late 50s, he said, and I'm paraphrasing, but I'm really close. By the way, one of the most important classes I took up the hill was Oklahoma history at the college level. We talked about the race riots in the 20s in Tulsa. We talked about the Ku Klux Klan existed in the teens and 20s of the previous decade. We went through all that sort of stuff. It was an amazing class. But nonetheless, in the 50s, we went the other way. It's just an amazing accomplishment. Raymond Gary, his quote was, if you believe we're all God's children, how can you treat another one of God's children differently? I mean, it's hard to argue with that. Now, he didn't get reelected, but he saved us a lot of misery and he pointed us in the correct direction. So when I talk about Oklahoma, I don't just discuss oil and gas and agriculture and all the open space on the west side and all the awesome trees and water on the east side. I discuss our heritage. We had problems like everybody else. We've done a really good job of overcoming them. And not just in the present day. I mean, Raymond Gary saved us so much misery. Sometimes elected officials do good work. Governor Gary did. Don't laugh, Senator.
Congressman Lucas, we appreciate you being here today. Fellow Aggie Congrad, just a year behind you. So I read some I describe as a highly technical term gibberish in the last couple of days about biolabs and the Russians pointing fingers at us and the Chinese pointing fingers at us, which I describe as a bunch of BS. And I'm just curious what your opinions are on it.
You have the most open scientific model in the United States in the history of the world. You have examples in the two countries you just described where society and their scientific communities are so closed. I would suggest that if I have the privilege of chairing the science committee, we're going to look at things that have gone on in recent years around the world. And using the best technology, we're going to try and determine what really happened. Now, I'm a little careful in what I say, but just understand, we're going to figure out what's gone on or not gone on. Right now, Mr. Putin is willing to come up with any justification whatsoever to explain why he's lost. Again, I'm not on the right committees, but if you believe the popular press, 8 generals, maybe 10,000 troops, cut that by 10, that's still 2 generals and a couple thousand troops almost. He's got to rationalize what he was doing. There was somebody else in the 1930s who rationalized his actions also. Give the Europeans credit. They have been very hesitant about the call that we have put on them for the last 25 years about spending at least 2% of the gross domestic product on defense. That doesn't make anybody any money, they say. You don't need to do that. Well, now suddenly, not only are the Germans going to spend 2%, which will be a dramatic increase in real money, but the folks in Finland and Sweden are deciding maybe they need to be a part of NATO. It is It's tragic when you have to have this sort of an event to wake people up to what should have been straightforward in the beginning. I regret that when the Soviet Union fell down in 1991, we weren't more aggressive in reaching into that society to try and help them break away from the historic pattern of the czars and the general secretaries of the Communist Party. But I wasn't in a responsible position then. And I'm not going to criticize who was there at the time. But Yeltsin, who helped make sure that the communists did not regain control of the country, had some bad habits. He was not the best chief executive officer. Yes, it's amazing, I guess, how much vodka you can drink in a day. But when he melted away, we got Putin. Remember the old model. You had the Tsar and his secret police prior to 1917. Then you had the Soviet Union under Lenin and Stalin and their KGB and their secret police. It was always said that the Communist Party kept a firm grip on the secret police and the army. Every army unit of any consequence had a commissar with them. The commissar had a pistol. The commissar was authorized to enforce the party decision if the military didn't follow through, and enforce it with the secret police. Soviet Union collapses, the Communist Party goes away, the Russian army implodes on itself. Who's left but the secret police? The FSB now, I guess they call themselves, not KGB anymore. And from within their ranks, Putin rose up. The secret police are in Russia what the Communist Party was in the Soviet days. There's a part of that group on every corporate board. There's a part of that group in every level of government. That's Putin's power structure, which is why he has a terrible problem on his hand, having made the mistake of getting into this mess. Because at some point, the secret police will say it's better to save our brotherhood that runs this country than it is to save you. And I'm not calling for anything bad to happen. I'm just observing the nature of the place. They've always played for real over there and played mean. From one of the former generals' books written after the Soviet Union fell in 1991, he pointed out that the most important meeting of the Central Committee of the Communist Party from 1917 to 1991 took place in 1953 after Stalin died. What was the subject matter of the meeting? Stalin, who was right there with Hitler, wherever they both are now, in a very warm place, I would think, wherever they are, when Stalin died, Central Committee brought in Stalin's secret police chief, Beria, and they had a 15-minute trial, and it took him to the basement, and that was the end of it. And after that, they agreed for the first time since 1917, when there was a power structure within the Central Committee, the senior party officials, the losers would be allowed to retire. Because always before, they retired you for real. They'd be allowed to go off somewhere. Khrushchev went off to a nice little house in the country when he got kicked out of power in 1963. That's a different society than we live in. And that's the mentality we're dealing with Mr. Putin, and why it's so perilous. We have to support those Ukrainians in every way we can, but you cannot put combat troops in there. The no-fly zone, that would mean potentially shooting down Russian planes. Yes, sir.
Congressman, historically, when we've seen oil and natural gas prices where they are now, even discounting what Russia's doing in Ukraine, we've seen a great deal of activity.
Absolutely.
We hear verbiage from production companies that say they're listening to their stockholders, and there's a greater return to the stockholders. They're being much more conservative. How much of that do you attribute to what may happen in the upcoming election? And what the political will be there? We hear our president say that, hey, nobody's stopping anybody from drilling right now. Give me your take on that, please.
The mantra of this majority in the House and Senate and the White House has been social and environmental justice. I serve with a huge number of folks who do not believe that fossil fuel should ever be used. That's oil, gas, yes, that's coal. And the people at EPA and the people at the Department of Energy and all the federal agencies that control permits on public land and private land, it's all to discourage traditional oil and gas. Let me put my science hat back on for just a moment. We live in a very energy intensive world. I like air conditioning. I like heat. I like automobiles. I like the wonders of the world we live in, but it requires energy. I would suggest to you that we do need to transition to cleaner, more efficient types of fuel. But I would suggest to you that it's not the stick or the baseball bat method of getting us there. It's the carrot approach. Research, innovation, creating new sources that the market will embrace and shift over. On the Science Committee, we are spending a lot of money on a variety of research programs to try and perfect fusion. Remember, fission's the atomic bomb, split atoms, things go boom. Fusion is the mechanics of the sun. Turn water into electricity, have a little bit of hydrogen and oxygen left over as waste, no radiation. But that may be 5 years or 15 years or 25 years or 100 years away. But that's ultimately where we go. But until we get there, we have to live. I'm far enough out where I live. I can see windmills from the east horizon to the west horizon. It's not one company, but at night they all blink together. So you see them start in Custer County and watch them blink over into Texas. But the wind doesn't blow all the time. And in the summertime, when we need the most electricity, the air temperature is hot enough, those generators occasionally burn up. So they can't run them all the time. My friends back east want to do solar panels. Oh my goodness. Are you ready for 160 acres or 640 acres of solar panels? And as the Germans learned, the sun doesn't always shine either all the time. So until we get to those next generation of energy sources, we have to use what we have efficiently and effectively. Natural gas is the transition fuel. And I think any of us in this room are involved in the oil and gas business would tell you, if natural goes up to and stays at a certain level with 3D seismographing, horizontal drilling, all this awesome fracturing stuff, there is an ocean of natural gas yet to be tapped in North America, especially in Oklahoma. Let's make it burn a little cleaner, but let's use those resources. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think you change administrations, you change political appointees, you change the people doing the regulation, you'll see a dramatic increase in drilling, and you'll see pressure taken off of the price of gasoline. I sat at the State of the Union, this time for the first time ever. I don't know why the speaker did it, but House members had assigned seats. Customarily, when the president comes to do the annual address, the senators sit in a section, the cabinet's in a section, the generals are in a section, the ambassadors in a section, and then the rest of us, House members, fill in the body. But because of COVID protocols, they set us every other seat empty, people in gallery too. So I wound up sitting on the front row behind the cabinet officers on the aisle that the president comes in. I tell this because I'm still trying to decide whether someone wanted to hurt me or help me. I have friends in open seating who will sit there for 6.5 hours so they could be on camera. That's not the way I do business. So I go to the chamber, I prepare to go to my nice corner spot that I like, where I can view everything and take it all in. And floor staff said, no, Congressman, your seat's over there. What do you mean over there? It's over there. So I'm on the front row, I'm on the aisle, I'm where the president and the vice president all come through. And I'm thinking to myself, now this is the 3rd District of Oklahoma. This is a place where the other guy got 75% of the vote last election day. And I'm from Oklahoma. We're not disrespectful people. I serve with some interesting people in that regard, both R's and D's now back east. We're respectful people. So here comes the president. He reaches out to shake my hand. Of course you don't. You shake the president's hand. That's being civil. And I'm thinking, how are they going to react to this in the newspaper back home? But my father always said, the Lord takes care of those that cannot take care of themselves. So just as Joe and I have a polite civil handshake, Secret Service agent passes in front of us, clearing the next 2 steps. There's no picture. It's a picture of the tie on the Secret Service guy. Oh, shucks. I survived. But back to the core issue, there'll be a change. You'll see the drilling take off. I personally, and my Aggie Con friends in the room may have a more refined opinion about this, but if the war in the Ukraine lasts long enough or is destructive enough to tear up the infrastructure, the grain storage to prevent people from planting, then we're going to see a different plateau for grain prices for a couple of years. If you can't ship it through the Black Sea and you have to haul it by truck or train out through Europe. So bottom line is, for the wrong reasons, I think we'll see a lot of economic activity in Oklahoma. But our fertilizer plants better crank it up, turning that. Yes, sir.
Congressman Lucas, while I appreciate the services that the Veterans Administration provides our veterans here in this state, and I've been fortunate to have the help of your office with a young lady named Allison in
Great caseworker.
Benefits. And while it appears in our Oklahoma City VA office, it becomes very difficult to try and talk to someone down there. And as a result, they've now started allowing us to use community care, to use our local physicians and facilities on here. But now it seems in the past year, the community care office has now passed it off to a third party, Optima or whatever. And the only way you talk to a computer. So I'm curious if you're familiar with that, if there are, if there's any works to make it easier to deal with the Veterans Administration.
It's an ongoing struggle to try and improve the efficiency and the speed of the services. I'll also admit to you, part of the challenge is, having been in the military field, the United States military folks in the field almost continuously for 30 years, we have a bigger group of veterans than we've had since the Second World War, and trying to match all that up. All I could tell you is we've had big debates. 10 years ago, the great debate was, is it better to continue to maintain the veterans hospitals and those facilities, or would it be better to close it all out and just give every veteran a slice of whatever the cost is that you could spend or go buy your own insurance? The service groups didn't like that. They basically put the kibosh on that because they were saying that there are certain veterans who need the kind of services that you have in a brick and mortar VA doctor, VA nurse, VA administrative facility. They didn't want to do that. There was some concerns amongst some of my colleagues that could veterans make the right decisions about how to handle the money if you did. And in the third group on the other side of the room basically just wanted to go to national health care for everybody, and there's not enough money. So we're working through the process. But if you've been in touch with Allison, you're talking to my best. And we'll keep trying.
Allow us to use our local physicians and our local facilities. It's working, but it's getting more difficult and difficult to communicate with the computer. You can't talk to the person.
Yep. USDA wants my farmers to do all their work on line too, and that's going over real well also. Yeah. Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you,